So 900 effective stacks, we're playing pretty tight, and villain has us covered. We open Ace King of Diamonds from under the gun to $25 at a 2-5 game, so we opened 5x. The middle position calls and the big blind completes. Flop $75, the big blind checks and hero bets $30. And then they get raised and, well, the hand just kind of turns into a madhouse from here. When asked, why should you bet this? The original poster, and later on some other coaches, said, well, you have 2 backdoors, and you have 2 overs. You can turn and river the wheel, you can turn and river diamonds, you can hit an ace or a king, and so if you are going to have a semi-bluff, this seems to be a reasonable semi-bluff outside of having, say, the ace king of spades. The problem is, I don't think that you should even have a bluffing range on this flop, because that would imply then you need to be balancing your value hands, and I don't think that you actually need to be balancing your value hands here. Let's go and... So, why is it that I come to the conclusion that I think this is a terrible spot to bet, and other players are coming to the conclusion that this is a good spot to bet? It has to do with the methodology which players are using to evaluate their hand histories. When people are looking at hands, usually what they do is that they get to whatever position and they put their opponent on a range. Then we look at our hand and then we say, okay, the equity of our hand against a villain's range is either it's really good or it's really bad. You know, we do whatever combinatoric exercise that we've learned from a workbook or with some piece of poker software. And then we think, oh, you know, we're going to apply some reads to individual parts of villain's range. So we'll say this guy's really straightforward, so he's always going to raise us with his, like, really strong draws and his, like, 2-pair hands and his sets and his flopped straights. Or we're going to look at another guy and say, oh, he's really trappy, and he really loves to set the trap into the river, so when he calls us, it's very likely that he is going to have slightly stronger hands than usual. And then we take our hand again, and then we make some kind of plan with all of these complicated variables. This is way too complicated, and for the most part, it just gets you to the wrong decision. So after you've done all of these combinatoric wizardry, then you look at your hand and you say, okay, cool, I have high equity against my opponent's range, and so then I'm going to take an action to play a large pot, aka I'm going to bet or raise, or I'm going to look at my hand and say, oh, my equity is low, and then I'm going to take actions to play a small pot. That is, I'm going to check, call, or fold. So when we go back and look at this hand history, when players are saying, oh, we should bet ace king of diamonds here, the implication here is that you should bet pocket eights, pocket fours, and pocket deuces because we need to have some kind of balancing range. This is wrong. How would you come to the conclusion that you should bet pocket eights? Well, you look at your hand and you say, oh, I have pocket eights. I have the nuts. It's the strongest hand. And no matter what my opponents have, I have an equity advantage against them, so I should be playing a large pot. The actual way that you should look at hand histories is first you indeed put your villain on a range based on the position and your action so far. But then we compare the equity of our range against the equity of villain's range, and then we determine the size of the range advantage. If our range advantage is high, we're going to try to play a larger pot, and if our range advantage is low, we're going to take actions to play a smaller pot. So going back to this board, when you raise under the gun and you get called by we'll say a reasonable middle position player, it's usually the case that he is going to have pocket eights, pocket fours, and pocket deuces. And it's also very likely that his middle position range is very condensed. And so the large proportion of his hands is going to be sets and other pocket pairs here. Very often when you try to put in the money on 842, especially when you are slightly less than 200 big blinds effective, you're often going to find that your opponent's going to only be putting in sets, and he's going to have sets more often than you. And so because his range has an equity advantage against us, even when we have strong hands, we should not be allowed to bet. So when you have a hand like pocket eights or pocket deuces, this is a hand that's much more likely to go into your check call instead of trap range, or your check raising range on the flop, depending on the action. For example, if you check middle position bets and then the big blind calls, that's a great spot to go ahead and check raise the entire field, and then try to play a big pot against both players while you are very ahead. Let's look at another common example where looking at your individual hand is often going to lead you to the wrong conclusion. Okay, so villain raises the button to $6, and we defend with pocket sixes in the big blind, very standard. The pot's $12.50, and the flop comes ace queen 6, giving us bottom set. We check, and villain bets 2/3. What should hero do? Let's look at how players traditionally evaluate this. Okay, so first we put our villain on a range. So the button has between 40 to 50% of hands, depending on how aggressive he is and depending how quote-unquote standard he is. But he has a pretty wide range, but he's also uncapped in the sense that he's got aces, queens, and ace queen. And because I just flattened the big blind, I probably don't have those hands. So now traditionally we would say, okay, how does pocket sixes fare against all of the hands that villain bets? So when villain chooses his bet size, he's polarized between betting some of his strongest hands and some of his strongest bluffs, and then checking back a lot of his kind of mediocre showdown hands like queen X or low ace X's. So against this range, sixes is definitely ahead. If we try to raise sixes here and put it all in, our opponent's often going to show us something worse. Check raising sixes here is not really the strategically best option, even on this flop where it seems like we should be getting a ton of action. And the reason is our range advantage on this board sucks. Ace Queen 6 is a board that clearly favors the pre-flop raiser, and so when we have any hand that is pretty strong here, we actually should only be check calling. If we have ace 6, pocket sixes, even hands as strong as king, jack of spades, you should be check calling these in order to, one, set traps on future streets and bolster how strong your range is going to be when you call, but also you're going to give yourself more board coverage, because now whenever a 10, spade, 6, or ace rolls off, you're now able to have quads and full houses in spots that your opponents are not necessarily going to give you credit for. Again, the most important thing you need to do from position to position is not evaluate how your hand fares against your opponent's range, but how your range fares against your opponent's range. Here in PIOsolver, I've set up this same example. The button opens 41% of hands, and we defend about 21% of hands, 3-betting, a variety of hands pre-flop. So we check, our opponent bets about 60% of his range because he has an advantage against us, and as we can see, PIO does recommend a little bit of check raising with 6-6, but as you can see, if you just go ahead and play an all flatting strategy on this board, it's going to be very, very close to what PIO recommends. And also, when we look at the actual EVs between calling and raising, we'll see that there's a 1 cent difference in EV between calling and raising with 6-6 with a $22 starting pot, right? So the EV of raising and calling this hand is extremely negligible, and as you can see here, it's even better to call when you have a hand like a6 or queen 6. Hopefully from now on, you'll recognize when you're looking at your hand rather than looking at your range and be able to correct some of your basic mistakes. Please don't look at your hand and then compare it to your opponent's range. We all know poker is played by evaluating situations range versus range. Don't fall into the trap of just looking at your hand. It's gonna make you make a ton of mistakes, and it also makes you really predictable to play against, because whenever you want to play a big pot, it's probably because you have a strong hand, and whenever you want to play a small pot, it's probably because you're very capped and your opponent's going to then run you over. Good luck.